Hi everybody, my name is Madie and welcome back to our Pacific Tiger Broadcasting series, Bookmarked, where I help you find your next new favorite dystopian novel. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorites, which is Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard, and of course I have it, so here's what the cover looks like. But Red Queen was originally published in 2015, and it is part of a 5-book series, but there are many novellas as well. And so let's break down how we'll analyze this book today. First, we're going to talk about setting. Then we're going to talk about the characters, and we just have one main character in Red Queen. Then we're going to talk about the content, where I break down the plot of the story, and I'll also give you my opinions on it. And finally, we'll talk about connections, where I reference some other books that maybe if you like these, it means you should check out Red Queen. Okay, let's get into it. So for the setting, Red Queen takes place in a futuristic North America that they refer to as Norta. And in this society, it is ruthlessly divided by blood colors. So there are the Reds, which are the commoners, and they serve the Silvers, which are people with superhuman abilities. So the Kingdom of Norta, picture a rocky, heavily wooded country that's said to look like a futuristic version of the New England states, such as New York or Pennsylvania. And in this area, the Silvers, or the elites with superhuman abilities, live like kings and queens. They live in a city, it's glimmering, it's fancy. And in stark contrast, the Reds live in slums called the Stilts. And to go into more detail about where the Silvers live, well, everybody who's a Silver has a very opulent house. A lot of them are like palaces, made from things like polished stone, diamonds, and glass. It feels very cold and unwelcoming. And so it symbolizes their wealth, but also their emotional detachment. And the royal palace, where much of this story takes place, is very imposing. It feels very menacing. I mean, it has vast halls, tons of chandeliers, tons of glass, and lots of silent guards that line the walls. So it's very tense and it feels very controlled. And it's like every single space in the Silver Cities feels very curated to maintain a sense of hierarchy and dominance. And as I said before, in contrast, the Reds are living in poverty under the looming power of the Silvers. So their towns, their slums, are very dusty, worn, and industrialized because most of where they live is surrounded by old factories, old mines, or barren farmland. So think of a setting where electricity is scarce, resources are practically unavailable, and the environment feels exhausted in every way. It's basically like their land has been exhausted from years of war and deprivation. And also, many Reds are being conscripted into a 100-year ongoing war against a place called the Lakelands, which basically symbolizes Canada. And so this means that the Red slums are basically devoid of young people. So it's just scarce, there's few people, there's few resources, and it just has a heavy sense of hopelessness. The air in Red settlements also often feels heavy. It's described in the book as filled with ash, smoke, or haze and other pollutants, which signifies a sense of both physical and social suffocation. Now, the broader landscape of Norta also mirrors this dichotomy, this sense of inequality, because outside of the gleaming city where the Silvers live, there's a lot of dense forests and farmland where the Reds are scraping by in small villages as well. And then in contrast to this, also out in the forest, are heavily militarized and fortified zones used during the war. So it's sort of dichotomy between people in opulence going to fight a war for practically no reason in the book, and then other citizens struggling to barely get by. And then the front lines of the war are very harsh, chaotic, and painful. It's filled with tons of trenches, lots of weaponry, and tons of mass destruction, suggesting that this society is basically on the brink of collapse. However, one of the most striking aspects of this setting is how technology and magic seemingly coexist. It feels like it's just meant to be. Because as I said before, the Silvers have superhuman abilities. So they have the ability to manipulate and interact with elements like fire, water, metal, and electricity. And these powers are seemingly wove into their infrastructure in the cities. And so this makes their cities feel almost alive, because it's not fully powered by machines, it's powered by both machines and the people themselves. And in contrast, the Reds who don't have these powers are basically left behind, both in technological and magical advances, which sort of deepens this divide between the two people. Overall, the setting of the Red Queen is defined by contrast, by this dichotomy. Everything is sort of in opposition to one another, and it just emphasizes the heavy imbalance between wealth and poverty and those who are ruled and those who rule. And here are some images from Pinterest to help you sort of visualize the setting. There's this drawing of an arena where the silvers showcase their powers. There's this one that shows the stilts. And here is a helpful map of Norta. On to the characters. So we only have one main character in Red Queen, and that is a young teenage girl named Mare Barrow. And so Mare is defined by her environment as much as she's defined by her resistance to it. So she's not your traditional protagonist. She's rough-edged, she's impulsive, and she relies on survival rather than idealism. She isn't really an optimist. So Mare is a Red. She's born into poverty in the stilts, and she lacks any superhuman powers. However, she's known to be very gifted at being a thief. She uses her quick reflexes and quick thinking to help keep her family afloat. This early characterization establishes her as resourceful, but also very cynical, because she doesn't believe in fairness and justice because she's truly never experienced them. If they weren't given to her, why should she treat somebody else like that? And then also, Mare's really interesting because, as I said before, she's not your traditional protagonist. She begins the story with a lot of anger simmering under the surface. I mean, rightfully so. She's angry at the system, she's angry at the people around her, and she's also angry at herself for not being able to feel like she's doing enough for her family. So physically, Mare is described as slight and unassuming. She has light brown hair and light brown eyes that basically blend her into the population with the rest of the Reds. But this ordinary appearance is very important because it's going to help make another contrast when she later on discovers that she has some extraordinary powers. And we'll talk more about the powers she develops later on in our content section because obviously it's a huge plot point. And now psychologically, Mare is a very complex character who often finds herself being very conflicted. She has a fierce love and respect for her family and people she cares about, but she's also willing to lie to get what she needs. But overall, she's a very guarded character. She's very strategic, but she also has a lot of empathy because she can really understand those around her and really see through the system. And ultimately, I really like Maeve's character arc because it's really transformational, but it's also really realistic because she goes from somebody who is just trying to survive to somebody who ends up wanting to make an impact in the system, a big impact. However, her growth and her character arc are, I guess, characterized by a lot of mistakes. She misjudges people, she chooses the wrong option, and sometimes she feels a lot of guilt about her moral actions. She thinks deeply about whether what she's doing is right or wrong, but ultimately she's a very realistic character. You can really see yourself in her, and she truly does feel like a teenager. And here are some pictures from Pinterest to help you sort of get a vision about what Maeve looks like. There's this one, and there's this one too. Okay, on to the content of the story. So the book begins in the impoverished village of the Reds called the Stilts. And this is where Mare lives, and she's only surviving by being able to steal for her family. And the caveat is that she's about to turn 18. And when you turn 18 as a Red, you have two options. Well, sometimes three. But the first one is that you're forced to fight. The second one is that you're forced into servitude. Or the third one is like you could sort of get an apprenticeship. However, by luck of the draw, Mare actually finds herself a job at the royal palace. And here at the royal palace, she is thrust into the heart of silver society, which she hates. She thinks all of these people are snobby and rude, and she is not wrong. However, the book really begins when Mare is working her first event, which is something called the Queen's Trial, which is where a lot of the silver people gather, the affluent people gather, and the noblewomen display their powers to manipulate the elements in order to gain a man's hand in marriage. And so at this event, Mare is able to witness all of the extraordinary powers that the Silvers have, which she truly has never seen before. And so the setup of the Queen's trial is basically a large room, like a theater, and a pit in the middle. And the pit in the middle is where you basically move the elements, you play with the elements, you interact with them, and you show off all your cool skills. But unfortunately, as Mare is serving somebody food and drinks, she actually falls over and falls into the pit. And this is where something impossible happens, because Mare actually survives. And at the time, the pit was electrified, and the only people who can survive falling into the electrified pit are Silvers, who have the power to wield electricity. But Mare survives, and not only does she survive, she starts to generate electricity herself, which can only mean one thing. She must somehow be Silver too. So this moment changes everything in the story. It is definitely the biggest catalyst, because once Mare does this, everybody begins to freak out because they know she's a red, but somehow she's possessing a silver ability, and that's not possible. That would cause a lot of chaos. So in order to cover this up, the king at the time, King Tiberius, creates a lie. He says that Maeve is actually secretly a long-lost silver princess. Like, who would even believe that? I mean, I guess all the people in the book. But anyways, he convinces all the people at the Queen's trial that she's actually a silver by blood, so there's nothing to worry about. And in order to really solidify this, he actually marries off Maeve to his youngest son, Prince Maven, in a sort of arranged marriage in order to cover up this whole debacle. So Mare is basically trapped in the palace with the people she hates, at the place she hates, among people who are nothing like her. And so Mare finds a little bit of solace by connecting with Prince Maven's older brother, Prince Cal. And he's been really kind to her. He's been helping her a lot. He's really trying to understand her story. But at the same time, Mare begins to be involved with a rebel group. This rebel group is called the Scarlet Guard. And Mare decides to serve as a spy for them, feeding them information from inside the palace about very important things like war, finances, economic plans, etc. So as she's basically learning to use her powers and living among the Silvers, she's secretly betraying them. And however, to make it even more complicated, she starts to fall in love with Prince Cal. I guess, obviously. But she's starting to fall in love with him, but then at the same time, she's also betraying him, which leads Mare to have a lot of guilt, and she's really struggling with how to navigate it because she's not feeling like a red, and she's not feeling like a silver, and she's not even feeling like herself. And she's ultimately begun to deceive everybody around her, no matter who. It's all a big lie. And she just is tired of it. And so the climax of the story centers on a major rebellion that the Scarlet Guard creates at a big public palace event. However, there's a major twist, and it goes really wrong. And you discover that it goes wrong because Prince Maven actually knew the whole time that Mare was working with them. And he was using her and manipulating her in order to gain information about the Scarlet Guard and practically destroy it from the inside. So it's very intense. You don't expect this twist coming, but don't worry, I didn't spoil it fully because you cannot possibly imagine what happens after this. But you'll just have to read to find out. But ultimately, I would rate the first book of the Red Queen series a 9 out of 10. And I say first book because it's my favorite of the series, and I would probably rate the rest of the series like a 7 out of 10, just because I think I'm emotionally attached to the first book. It's so good. But also, the first book just has really good pacing. It also has really good suspense, and it's really tense, and it's a good ratio between like a character-driven story and a plot-driven story. And I also think that the plot deals with a lot of timely things, so it's overall a really fantastic read. Now, on to connections. So if you've read any of these books, which you probably have, you should definitely check out Red Queen. The first one is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Obviously, this book is also about an oppressive government and a structured society that divides people into different districts and classes. The second connection would be one of my favorite books, Divergent by Veronica Roth. So this is yet another dystopian society that is divided based on different abilities, and people are sort of sorted into places that they can't change. And then the last connection would be Legend by Mary Lou, and this is similar in the fact that it's a very militarized society, their government has a lot of control, and we see our main characters really trying to rebel against the system. But thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Bookmarked, and I hope it inspired you to read Red Queen. I'll see you in the next episode.